Welcome to Genesis Unleashed, where we reveal the truth of Genesis.
And ask evolutionists questions like, how did the DNA code originate?
Welcome again to Genesis Unleashed. We're continuing to go through the Question Evolution Flyer, and we are on question number 2.
That's right.
Question number 2 is, how did the DNA code originate? Another serious problem for evolutionists. Here's what it says in the flyer. The code is a sophisticated language system with letters and words where the meanings of the words is unrelated to the chemical properties of the letters, just as the information on this page is not a product of the chemical properties of the ink or pixels on a screen. What other coding system has existed without intelligent design? How did the DNA coding system arise without it being created?
Right.
And there's a link, I guess we can put the link up, that's in the flyer as well, creation.com/code.
Right.
And that'll take you to actually an article that you did.
That's right. It was called Lost in Translation. And what I pointed out in the article is that in any kind of code system, and DNA is a code system, it's a language system. It's got all the
properties of a language system. Yes.
That's right.
Yep.
And of course, in any language system, you not only need a language to be functional, but you need a translation device for that particular language. So if the folks out there can speak English and understand English in spoken,
then everybody's happy.
Everybody's great. If you don't understand this, I'm just babbling, right?
Yeah.
So you need both of those things there at the same time. Now, I point out that atheists who believe that there is no God, no intelligent design or creator, believe in a materialistic universe. So there can be nothing metaphysical, so to speak. But the fact is that all biological life, all life as we know it, there's billions of bits of...
It's based on information.
Information
yeah.
inside it, these living things. And information itself is not derived from matter. And that's very easy to illustrate.
Right. Just like the question summarized there very briefly.
Right. Ink, does not create information. If I take a piece of chalk and write my name on a blackboard, or, hi, my name's Cal on the blackboard, where'd the information come from? Because if I wipe off all the chalk, there's no information in chalk.
Right. Yeah.
So information always can be traced back to an intelligent mind. And if you believe that a code system could come into being without an intelligent mind, the onus is on you to prove that that's not true. Because with all our observation, which is what science is mostly based upon, we're winning this argument.
Yes, hence the question in the Question Evolution Flyer.
Right.
How do you explain information?
Exactly. Now, this is a huge problem, by the way, for atheistic evolutionists and evolutionists in general, because there's actually a group down in the United States. I wrote another article on it called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And the reason I said that is because this group, the Origin of Life Foundation, is offering $1 million. I'll just read it here. They're offering this prize through the Gene Emergence Project, and it's dedicated to finding the answer to what biology professor Jack Travers, a member, calls the most pressing question in science. So apparently out of the 15, this is the most pressing.
Okay, and this guy's not a creationist,
Oh,
right?
no, he's not a creationist. No.
Yes,
But you can look at their site. They're not anyway, they're not creation promoters. The origin of the genetic instructions in the DNA, that's the most pressing question in science. And he points out the genetic instructions don't write themselves any more than software programs write themselves.
Sure.
So he's making that point.
Nobody's claimed the $1 million yet?
No.
I don't know if anyone out there. Maybe some of the folks who sent in the supposed answers to these to
they
this
could
question
make themselves
here,
$1 million. Yep.
They can make a cool $1 million.
Okay. So answer number 1 that we received back from skeptics was this. This is not an evolution question because evolution starts with an already reproducing organism. It's amazing to me that this is such a dodge. Let's just be honest.
We've done this before.
Yeah.
We've been here before, haven't we?
If you're an atheist and there is no God, where did life come from? It didn't come through an intelligent designer or a creator. It had to happen naturally. You have to explain how the first living thing got here. Living things operate on information. You have to explain this question. And even atheist or former atheist, Anthony Flew, he's passed away now. But he was a leading philosopher, atheist. He debated Christians. He debated anybody who believed in a God.
Yeah, for a time.
Came to say things like this. about this question. It seems to me that Richard Dawkins constantly overlooks the fact that Darwin himself, in the 14th chapter of The Origin of Species, pointed out that his whole argument began with a being which already possessed reproductive powers. This is the creature, the evolution of which a truly comprehensive theory of evolution must give some account.
Sure.
Darwin himself was well aware that he had not produced such an account. It now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research has provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. So he actually looked at what was, because of our advanced technology, looked inside living things and said, wow, this is evidence of design. You've got information systems, you've got machines, et cetera, et cetera. And he changed his position from atheist to deist, or I don't know what you'd say, but he believed that it was some kind of
sort of intelligent designer. Yeah, and it's interesting also that he points out that with the advancements of science, and this is often an accusation that's leveled against us, with the advancements of science, it actually points to design. You're not getting more answers for evolution.
Right.
As is commonly said, well, you know, in the future we'll have answers to these questions. We don't have them right now, but science is the savior. But science has been really
vindicating any kind of creationist
belief. It's been supporting biblical creation.
That's right.
The more we discover.
Now, there's one other part here to answer this question. This isn't an evolution question, but here's the thing. A huge problem is that DNA information requires complex decoding machines, including the ribosome. So it can be decoded into the specifications to build the proteins required for life. So you need DNA for life. But the information required to build ribosomes is itself encoded in the DNA. So DNA information can't be encoded without its products of translation, forming a vicious circle. And decoding machinery requires energy from ATP, built by ATP synthase motors, built from instructions in the DNA, decoded by ribosomes. And these are vicious circles for any kind of
It's like having the bits of a CD player in a bag and the assembly instructions on a CD.
Right.
If you don't have an existing CD player, you're out of luck.
You're toast, yep.
Very good. Okay, answer number 2. This is another supposed answer that came into question number 2 in the question evolution flyer. Originally, life used RNA instead of DNA to encode information. The RNA world hypothesis. Right. This has been floating around. It's nothing new. Here's our first response to that. Where's the evidence? Is there any fossil evidence of animals, of any creature living long ago that was based on RNA? Right. Where's the evidence for that?
So it's based on faith, in a sense.
It's based on...
Not based on observation, anyway.
It's not based on observation, no. And there are huge, huge problems with this RNA world notion. And for more details, you can go to creation.com/RNA. Here's some of the problems. Well, this article actually, it discusses the objections to this RNA world that supposedly DNA came from, and it discusses a major origin of life researcher, his results, and or his critiques of this RNA.
And evolutionists are critiquing this RNA hypothesis as well.
Yes. Yeah. RNA. Here's one of the problems. RNA is even less stable than DNA.
Right.
If you thought DNA was bad enough, DNA. Each one of our cells has about 1 million letters, DNA letters changing a day, and then there's repair mechanisms that come in there and they have to fix those. RNA is even more unstable than that. And without a repair mechanism in place, how can you just have RNA sitting around for any length of time? It's just going to disintegrate. That's one of the biggest problems.
It works well short term.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's coming up later about it can translate things short term, but we'll deal with that when we get to that particular answer. But you can go to creation.com/RNA and get a lot more details about why this particular supposed answer to this question just doesn't work.
Right. Now, answer number 3, people said it's disingenuous to argue from the current DNA code because the original code would have been much simpler. So they're arguing that, hey, okay, today all we have is DNA to study, so et cetera, but this is not good because in the past we would have had a simpler code. However, if you use that argument, you actually challenge one of the biggest arguments that evolutionists have proposed over the years, including Richard Dawkins himself, who's the kind of the champion atheist out there right now. And because many evolutionists have claimed that because DNA is a universal code in all life forms, it proves that, see, we all started from an original
common
ancestor.
Yes.
And then that same code, it's varied and da-da-da-da-da. But, and so Dawkins will argue this way. For example, in one of his books, I guess one of the latest books he wrote, The Greatest Show on Earth, this is the way he argued along these lines. Any mutation in the genetic code, or sorry, let me back up here. He says the 64-word dictionary, by which 3-letter DNA words are translated into 20 amino acids and 1 punctuation mark, which means start reading here or stop reading here, is the same 64-word dictionary wherever you look in the living kingdom. And then he said, with 1 or 2 exceptions, too minor to undermine the generalization. Keep that in mind.
Okay.
And then he said, any mutation in the genetic code itself, as opposed to mutations in the genes that it encodes, would have instantly catastrophic effects, not just in one place, but throughout the whole organism. In any word in the 64-word dictionary changed its meaning, if any of them changed its meaning, so that it came to specify a different amino acid, just about every protein in the body would instantaneously change, probably in many places along its length. Unlike an ordinary mutation, this would spell disaster.
Okay, now why don't we just pause there
Yep.
and work through this. What's he saying?
Okay, he's saying that if you've got these, these chemicals that are coding, let's say, for a specific
Particular amino acid.
Yes, and so you've got three letters here encoding for something. So let's say you've got UGA, okay, and that's coding for a certain amino acid. If the code changed, if some kind of mutation or made the code itself change so that these 3 letters now coded for something different, well, all of a sudden, when things were being played out in this organism, you'd have just changed the meaning of all the structures of everything in the organism, and it'd just collapse, it'd die. He's saying, so he's arguing that because we have a common DNA code amongst everything, a genetic code,
That it has to be the same.
That's
for
right.
all living things for all time.
Right. And that if you changed it somewhere along the way, that wouldn't work, right?
Right.
However,
But it has changed.
well, it's not just that it has changed, but the fact is that there's different genetic codes.
Not just one.
So he's wrong. This is one of the world's leading atheists arguing from evolution to prove we have a common ancestor, and this is the argument. But there's a fellow named Craig Venter, that people might know because he was supposedly the guy who created an artificial life form, etc., which he really didn't do.
Big in the news. But
yeah, go to creation.com. You'll get our take on that. But anyway, there was a program which you can find online, by the way, and it was titled "The Unity of Life." Okay, it was about the great debate, the unity of life. Where did life come from? So it's got Richard Dawkins, it's got Craig Venter was there, Paul Davies was there, some well-known evolutionists, and they were discussing where life came from. And so in this panel discussion, Venter actually points up, because somebody said, Paul Davies, I believe, said, well, we've all got the same genetic code. We have a common ancestor.
And that's what Dawkins has been saying.
That's right.
Yes.
And Venter actually, on the video, says, well, you don't have the same genetic code. Now, he's an expert in his field, by the way, so if you want to argue with him, that'd be... He says, in fact, the mycoplasmas, which is a group of bacteria that he and his team are studying, and supposedly this is the bacteria he created the first life form from. Anyway,
right, yeah.
or a life form. He says these mycoplasmas use a different genetic code that would not work in your cells, so there are a lot of variations on the theme. Now, if you watch the video, Paul Davies at this point, he kind of says, what? Like he's surprised. He didn't know about this.
And Dawkins, too.
That's right. And Davies goes, but you're not saying that this mycoplasma, this bacteria, belongs to a different tree of life from me, are you? Now, this is interesting because if you look at the common theory of evolution, right, we've got a common ancestor, and it's like a tree, and you start here, and all these branches go out.
Yeah, and it's a nice, easy to understand notion, right? You have a single ancestor of all living things on Earth, and through small changes, you can visualize it in your head very nicely.
Right.
But that picture...
What the fellow says is, no. You've got different codes that can translate for different things. Exactly what Dawkins was saying, that you couldn't have this one thing turning into another. But we've got multiple creatures, over 17 different genetic codes that we know of now, that Venter, talks about.
Now wait a minute. So now, the evolutionary scenario, rather than this nice, simple, elegant little tree with a single trunk, now it's it's what, more like an orchard?
Right, because you don't
have
start with one
17
thing.
different trees?
Yeah, because you've got all these different codes, right? And near the end of this interaction, Dawkins himself, he says, I'm intrigued. He says, at Craig saying that the tree of life is a fiction. I mean, the DNA code of all creatures that have ever been looked at is all but identical. And so Dawkins himself, he's not even aware that there's at least 17 different codes.
Clearly, this information caught him off guard.
Right, right. Now, what does Ventnor mean here? Well, in human cells, the codon UGA, so those 3 chemical letters, code for stop, meaning it's at the end of an open reading frame. So, it's reading along, and it gets to the end, and it says stop, right? So it stops.
Like a period at the end of a sentence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, in the mycoplasma, where UGA appears, it actually codes for the amino acid tryptophan. So
it's like a different language. You've got different languages encoded on the DNA.
But the same letters.
Same letters, different language.
Right.
It's kind of like German and English.
That's right.
German was my first language, and you can think of words in German that have the same letters as words in English that have completely different meanings. For example, the word gift.
Right.
G-I-F-T.
Right.
Now in German, for those of you who speak German, that's the word for poison. You don't want to give someone a gift.
Right.
That's not very nice. Same letters, different
meaning.
Completely different meaning. And so we've got 17 different, could we call them languages then?
I guess so. That we're aware of. And the thing is, this points out something about information that's very interesting. Information is arbitrary.
Right.
Right? You assign a meaning to things. An intelligent mind, because GIFT, well, number one, GIFT, that's a certain arrangement of even the whatever you're using, whether it's ink or you're drawing in the sand or whatever like that. Yeah. That's all representative, and it's assigned a meaning by an intelligent mind. So gift means gift because the creator of the code says it means gift. But gift over here means this because the creator of the code and assigns a meaning for it.
It just feeds you right back to an intelligent designer must have been there to start life off.
Right. So number one, if you argue that the code must have been simpler, you've got a huge hurdle because you can't change a code from one to another without some kind of translator.
Right. It's complex enough, thinking of it just as a tree that gets more and more complex and gets information from whatever. Matter, I suppose. Supposedly, but now you've got 17 different languages or 17 different codes that have to.
And you've got to swap from one to another. And you have to remember, there is a minimum amount of genetic information that would have needed to be present for even the simplest living creature. For example, I guess they think the simplest creature today is what they call a mycoplasma genitalium. It's got 580,000 letters coding for 482 proteins. Now, this thing actually can't even survive on its own. It's a parasite. So without other life forms,
sort of kind of call it life.
Right, but it needs life to actually survive. But anyway, but that's 580,000 letters of information that you have to have anyway, and that's for the simplest thing we've ever seen. So anyway, not a very good...
no, not a very good answer.
Yeah.
All right, number 4. This one is a little more extensive. The question of how the modern code emerged from these early predecessors is evolution itself. Random deviations in the nucleic acid structure would change the byproduct produced. If the byproduct was more efficient at replicating, it would overwhelm the less efficient codes. This gradual change in complexity of the underlying code is useful in explaining many aspects of biological theory, such as why RNA is used as an intermediate between DNA and protein systems.
Well,
or protein synthesis, rather.
I think the last thing we just talked about kind of blows a hole in that theory. Because if it's going to code for a code stop sign here and it's going to code for tryptophan over here, you don't have graduated changes. You have sudden changes which are catastrophic to the organism.
Yes, all of these problems, and if you go back to question 1, we're on question 2 here, but question 1 for the evolutionists in the question evolution, all of those sort of rebuttals also figure in quite prominently here. But here's the rebuttal, anyways, on our website. You can read this as well online. Random deviations would randomly change the byproduct produced. So they would disrupt all the proteins encoded. It's hopeless. RNA is used as an intermediate because it's more likely to change. It's optimal for the short time frames needed to communicate between DNA and to make the protein.
Right.
But it's hopeless in a world where you're talking about eons of time. RNA isn't going to do it.
It's not going to last.
And so the suggestion that maybe RNA could be involved in there somehow is
Yeah.
again. But by the way, there's a website called DNAtranslation.info that has an amazing animation of what RNA does, and you can look at you can watch the transcription from the DNA as it goes, as the RNA reads it, and so on, and then eventually you get to proteins. It's just a fascinating.
It is. It's mind blowing
animation there.
Yeah. So this supposed question, well, the change from one code to another code is evolution itself. It's never been observed, just like evolution.
That's another thing that could be said.
Yeah, you're just saying it happened, but you're not saying how it happened, which is the whole thing,
Yeah.
right? You're just making an assertion. Answer
five.
number 5. The words code and language are only metaphors when applied to the DNA code, and they have no reality outside of our own mental constructs. In reality, the whole thing is dependent on chemical properties. Well, wait a second. Scientists use the words letters and language and code to describe DNA.
Blueprint and information and
Right.
coded complexity.
And so what else would you call it? Because it's the same as any other code we see. You've got things
It
that
is
are
a language.
symbolic. It's a language.
It's a code. It's a language.
Yeah.
It has all of the features that you have in a language.
If you're arguing that that the whole thing is dependent on chemical properties, if you see someone using smoke signals, right? And so what actually is creating the language?
It's a form of a code, right?
Right. But what is actually doing that? It's smoke. It's just bits of burnt wood going up into the air. Are you saying that those bits of burnt wood somehow create the information? No. There's a convention there. Someone has assigned meaning to, well, I don't even know how that works, but, but any kind of code system, zeros and ones in computers, or Braille, for example. Braille's just raised bumps. That's all it is. But, you know, if you get a zit on your nose or something, there's no information in there because no one's assigned any meaning to it.
That one, but
so this is just, you know, you're just looping around here. Well, this is all dependent on chemical properties. Well, no, it's not. The arrangement of the chemicals is actually what gives it meaning, not simply the chemicals themselves.
not a very strong answer.
Right.
All right, answer number 6, this is the last one we have. It's easy to create amino acids and the building blocks for RNA by running an electrical charge through mineral-rich water. That's one that came in.
Right.
Our answer is, no, you can't.
Right.
Sorry, but that just, it's not going to happen.
Perhaps they've read somewhere in a textbook about the Miller-Urey experiment or something like that and just took it for granted and I don't know.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But let's say that you could do that. Have a bunch of minerals and some water, run electricity through it. If you could actually get the amino acids necessary for life, they're only building blocks. That's like bricks,
right,
or something to make a building. It doesn't involve plumbing or electricity or anything else.
Or the information.
Or the information, which we've already been through. But if you could get all of those things and the sugars and everything needed to produce RNA from those conditions, you'd only have the first step. You would then have to polymerize. You'd have to assemble all of those things in order to get the proteins. And then the proteins need to be very carefully folded. And you can watch the animation on DNAtranslation.info. The proteins have to be very specifically folded. If they're not folded properly, one improperly folded protein can wreak havoc within the cell.
Right.
That's has to be very precise. And then all of those things, once they're built and sort of built, they need to be kept separately because you don't want them to react with each other and destroy each other. So then you have to have all kinds of things in place. Running electricity through mineral-rich water is not going to get you. If you could get the building blocks for life, you only have building blocks.
Right.
How would those building blocks build themselves into an apparatus that was self-replicating, into a living cell?
Right. It's interesting that many of the answers that came in, supposed answers, they really didn't even address the arguments from the pamphlet. Like, for example, saying that, well, the DNA, we call it a code, but that's not really, that's just a convention. What does that have to do with actually answering the question, where did DNA come from? You know, and so several of these objections actually just don't even tackle it.
But I mean, isn't that the case with all 15 questions that we have in the pamphlet here? I mean, they're serious questions, and we put them in there because we believe they can't be answered, or can't be answered easily.
Yeah.
And so the responses that we've received to these 15 questions are questions like this, questions that, well, they just wouldn't work. Running electricity through water, or dodging the
issue,
attempting to you know, bring in semantic arguments. Well, it's not really a language.
Yeah.
Well, it is.
That's right. So we're going to continue on this series, and you can get more information about this and the creation, or the Question Evolution campaign at creation.com. Language to be functional, but you need a translation device for that particular language. So if the folks out there can speak English and understand English in you know, spoken,
then everybody's happy.
Everybody's great. If you don't understand this, I'm just babbling, right?
Yeah.
So you need both of those things there at the same time. Now, I point out that atheists who believe that there is no God, no intelligent design or creator, believe in a materialistic universe. So there can be nothing metaphysical, so to speak. But the fact is that all biological life, well, all life as we know it, there's billions of bits of...
It's based on information.
Information inside it, these living things. And information itself is not derived from matter. And that's very easy to illustrate.
Right. Just like the question summarized there very briefly.
Right. You know, ink.
Welcome to Genesis Unleashed, where we reveal the truth of Genesis.
And ask evolutionists questions like, how did the DNA code originate?
Welcome again to Genesis Unleashed. We're continuing to go through the Question Evolution Flyer, and we are on question number 2.
That's right.
Question number 2 is, how did the DNA code originate? Another serious problem for
you know, does not create information. If I take a piece of chalk and write my name on a blackboard, or hi, my name's Cal on the blackboard, where did the information come from? Because if I wipe off all the chalk, there's no information in chalk. So information always can be traced back to an intelligent mind. And if you believe that a code system could come into being without an intelligent mind, the onus is on you to prove that that's not true. Because with all our observation, which is what science is mostly based upon, we're winning this argument.
Yes, hence the question in the Question Evolution Flyer.
Right.
How do you explain information?
Exactly. Now, this is a huge problem, by the way, for atheistic evolutionists and evolutionists in general, because there's actually a group down in the United States. I wrote another article on it called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And the reason I said that is because this group, the Origin of Life Foundation, is offering $1 million.
Evolutionists. Here's what it says in the flyer. The code is a sophisticated language system with letters and words where the meanings of the words is unrelated to the chemical properties of the letters, just as the information on this page is not a product of the chemical properties of the ink or pixels on a screen. What other coding system has existed without intelligent design? How did the DNA coding system arise without it being created?
Right.
And there's a link, I guess we can put the link up, that's in the flyer as well, creation.com/code.
Right.
And that'll take you to actually an article that you did.
That's right. It was called Lost in Translation. And what I pointed out in the article is that in any kind of code system, and DNA is a code system, it's a language system. It's got all the
properties of a language system. Yes.
That's right.
Yep.
And of course, in any language system, you not only need $11. I'll just read it here. They're offering this prize through the Gene Emergence Project, and it's dedicated to finding the answer to what biology professor Jack Travers, a member, calls the most pressing question in science. So apparently, out of the 15, this is the most pressing.
Okay, and this guy's not a creationist.
Oh,
right?
no, he's not a creationist. No.
Yes,
but you can look at their site. They're not well, anyway, they're not creation promoters. The origin of the genetic instructions in the DNA, that's the most pressing question in science. And he points out the genetic instructions don't write themselves any more than software programs write themselves.
Sure.
So he's making that, that point.
Nobody's claimed the $1 million yet?
No.
I don't know if anyone out there, maybe some of the folks who sent in the supposed answers to these to
They
this
could
question
make themselves
here,
$1 million, yep.
They can make a cool $1 million.
Okay, so answer number one that we received back from skeptics was this.